Thank you all for coming to CPW, and we welcome you online as well. Thank you. I'm Brian Wallace, Executive Director at CPW, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here today to the latest in our Conversations series. The goal of CPW, as you probably know, is to gather artists and photographers together in a community to provide a workspace and to provide learning opportunities through exhibitions, public programs, our library and other facilities that we have. As part of this, we have a monthly conversation series in addition to other public programs organized by our education program manager, Sarah Danziger, who I'll introduce in a minute. But really, it's my honor today to welcome two of the great leaders in the photography world today. The legendary photographer, author, and educator, Stephen Shore. And the great photo historian and my personal favorite curator, and the newly appointed Joel and Ann Ehrenkrantz Chief Curator at the Museum of Modern Art, Makeda Best. I will point out that both are longtime supporters of CPW. I believe Stephen was even a board member at one point in the 1980s. And he's currently in our exhibition, which I encourage you to investigate after the discussion, the Upstate Photography Biennial, our first ever, 39 great artists from the region. And I think it really exemplifies not only CPW's role as a hub, but the incredible capacity of this region to host hundreds and hundreds of great artists and photographers, of which this is just one interesting sample. After the talk, there will be a brief discussion. We welcome you to have wine and book signing and so forth. But right before that, I'm going to introduce you to Sarah Danziger, our fabulous education program manager, who organizes these weekly Meet the Artist exhibitions as well as other public events. And she's going to tell you a little bit about our speakers here today. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming to CPW today to hear what is sure to be a fascinating conversation. If you had told me 20 years ago while an undergraduate at SVA that I'd be here today introducing one of the biggest legends in photography at the newly expanded CPW here in Kingston, I truly would not have believed it. So it's with great delight that I introduce today's speakers and share a bit about their background in order to orient ourselves for today's conversation. Stephen Shore was the first living photographer to have a solo exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York since Alfred Stieglitz. And his influential exhibitions at Light Gallery in the 1970s helped establish color photography as a serious artistic medium. In 2017, the Museum of Modern Art presented a landmark retrospective spanning his entire career, cementing his status as a central figure in photographic history. Among his more than 30 books in 1998, he published The Nature of Photographs, a key text on visual perception, which he expands on in his forthcoming book, The Mental Image, which will be produced by MACK. Since 1982, he has served as Director of Photography Program here at across the river at Bard, and as the Susan Weber Professor in the Arts at Bard College. And joining Stephen Shore in conversation today is Makeda Best, a curator and scholar specializing in American photography, recently appointed the Joel and Ann Ehrenkrantz Chief Curator of Photography at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Best is the author of Elevate the Masses, Alexander Gardner, Photography and Democracy in 19th Century America. Her exhibition catalog, Devour the Land, War in American landscape photography since 1970, published by Harvard Art Museum, Yale University Press in 2022, was awarded the Photography Catalog of the Year award at the 2022 Paris Photo Aperture Photo Book Awards. Her most recent exhibition, American Job, 1940 to 2011, was presented at the International Center for Photography in 2025. Best earned her PhD from Harvard University. So let's give a warm welcome to Stephen Shore and Makeda Beth. Thank you.
These are on. So as I've made my way across the country here in the past week, one of the things that has really been kind of percolating about your work is the role of the journey and of movement in your own work and in your own practice, from America to the Yucatan to Ukraine. And I'm wondering if you could reflect with me for a moment on what that process of movement and of the kind of concept of the journey and or even a pilgrimage, how that has shaped your work and what that means to you.
Well, it began in a kind of matter-of-fact way. I grew up in New York City. Louder.
I think it might. Try to.
It's on. I grew up in. Can you hear it?
No. Let's see.
There. Okay, that's better. So I grew up in New York City and traveled to Europe and the East Coast, but hadn't been into the middle of America. And in New York, I found that my best friends, I fell in with a circle of friends who all were from Amarillo, Texas, and all moved to New York. And so I started going out there in the summers with them and saw a part of America I didn't know about and then wanted to explore it. And so I started these literal journeys as an explorer and would sometimes dress the part. I would, one year, got a gray jumpsuit and I'm wearing a safari jacket. I went to, one year I went to Abercrombie and Fitch, which in those days was not a yuppie clothing store. It was a safari, a traditional safari outfitter. If you were going big game hunting in Africa, you go to Abercrombie and Fitch. And I got a safari outfit to wear to be an explorer in America. And picked a different route each time and was an explorer. But there's a larger dimension to your question, which is it was not unknown to photographers that some of the very best photographers had surprisingly short hot streaks. And this was something we would discuss among ourselves. And there were some photographers who had like a singular vision that drove them for decades, like Auger, the Beschers, Zonder, and other photographers, I was going to say reinvented themselves, but that has maybe the wrong connotation, revitalized their work. And I'm thinking of Stieglitz, of Harry Callahan, in certain ways, Lee Friedlander. And I knew by temperament I was the latter kind. And I also found by temperament that whenever I found myself repeating myself, like I could handle it without thinking, I lost interest and wanted to go on. And so that propelled me on a different kind of journey where I kept wanting to challenge myself with different subject matter, sometimes different cameras, sometimes going to different countries.
When you mentioned the different cameras and the kind of work of traveling, I also connect with the fact that when you arrive at these places, there's a lot of work involved. You're selecting spaces, you are figuring out what you're going to do, you're handling equipment. And I feel like as a viewer, one also connects with that too, that there's a kind of physicality to what you're doing that opens up a space for the viewer to connect with you too.
I think so too. And part of it is, for 30 years, my main camera was an 8x10 view
Right.
camera. And it is an embodied experience. And the past 2 years, I've been writing a book that was mentioned, the mental image, and it's about embodied experience of a photograph. And in writing it, I found I missed using the 8x10, writing about what that experience is like. And so in the fall, started working again. My main focus is with an 8x10 in black and white. Because I just missed that. I missed having a big camera on a tripod. I missed standing next to the camera when I'm taking the picture, making immediate contact with my eye and my mind and my attention to what I'm photographing, and not have it mediated by the viewing system of the camera.
I want to come back to that, the new book and writing as well in a moment. But when you were speaking about the using the view camera and I was mentioning the physicality of it, I wondered if one of the things that I also think about when I read a lot of your criticism on your writing and kind of descriptions is it's often described as, you kind of discovering mundane details or things that are overlooked. And that always struck me, because I feel like that in the work of trying to set up that picture, there's actually respect there, that these details aren't mundane or they're not superfluous, that you're showing attention to them.
Yeah.
And they aren't that at all.
I agree. And I'm going to put it in two contexts. First, in terms of the series American Surfaces. In a way, that came about because I wanted to take pictures that looked like seeing, like the experience of seeing, not like composing a photograph. And I did it by just at random times during the day, taking what we now would call a screenshot of my field of vision. I'm in a taxi, I'm having dinner, I'm in an elevator, I'm having a conversation with someone. I could be talking to you now and go click and just see if I could memorialize what this is, and that helped me learn how to structure the picture. But the other thing I wasn't expecting was I'm doing this at random moments. And so it's when I'm looking at my dinner, when I'm in the back of a taxi. And so I realized that this is also a subject for a photograph. When I went to 8x10, it picked up on something like on that and expanded it. And what that is about experiencing the world with attention. That it's not that these events are trivial, it's that if you pay attention all the time, you see things that someone else will think is trivial.
Right. But it's also about a kind of, I'm wondering if it's also about an interest in choices that other people make, and in kind of respecting a gesture, the way in which someone comports themselves.
Yes. Or the way a street looks.
Right.
In '93, I did a project in Luzzara, Italy, and it was exactly 40 years to the month after Paul Strand was there, photographing for Un Paese. And one of the people involved in the commission was a really great Italian photo historian named Paolo Constantini. And he sent me a copy of a letter that Strand had written home while he was there, saying there were no buildings. It was difficult to photograph in Luzzara because there were no buildings of architectural interest. And it made me think about how those words, architectural interest, in the two generations that separated us, became something completely different. Like, I can't imagine a building that is not of interest. Like, this is the material that we as photographers get to use to explore the modern psyche in a way. That this is the built environment that's an expression of forces in the culture. And we can't photograph those forces unless they become physically manifest.
Right.
We're not writers. And so the built environment is why are the cars this style? Why are they painted this color? Why is the ground floor of this building renovated in this way?
Yeah, especially in vernacular architecture, you can see those kinds of choices that people have to make, that someone
Yes.
made a choice. Like there's a photograph that you made of a tiny little church.
Yes,
And it's like somebody made those choices
Yes.
with those materials.
yes,
And they had some sort of reference in mind. And the picture is in many ways recording that and respecting
yes,
that kind of moment.
yes. And I think that's why, so I had a show at Light Gallery in '74, and a man named Stephen Eisenhower wandered in. He was a partner of the architects Denise Scott Brown and Robert Venturi, and he picked up on what you're just saying. And this is exactly what they were interested in.
Right.
They were interested in the stylistic references in vernacular architecture.
So I mean, in some ways, the journey for you, and you just referenced Lusara, in some ways, the journey for you is connecting with photographers as well as connecting with a kind of a present as well.
Well, when I did Lusara, I decided not to try to do an updated Paul Strand 40 years later.
Yeah, but you're connecting with a kind of a lineage.
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, I was, I'd had a copy of the book probably since the 60s and knew it really well. But I also saw the limitations of his vision. Like, he was there in '53, and there are no power lines in the pictures. There are no cars in his pictures. He had an agenda which was to show an agrarian village, an idealized agrarian village, and so was selective in what he was showing. And I wanted to not be selective in that way and show, at least to my eye, what it looked like.
It's interesting that in these stories of your movement in Texas or in this project for Lusara, that, in one ways we can kind of see you as a kind of solitary figure, but you're actually not. I mean, you often reference other photographers that you're thinking about, friends, and you're very much within a generation, within a community as well, even though it can appear as if you are a kind of solitary figure.
Yeah.
But these other forces are very much kind of influencing you as well.
And sometimes literally, like if I'm on a 3-month trip and when I'm working, I work every day. I have breakfast, I work, and I work until it gets dark, and then the next day I do it again. At night, I watch television and load film. But there were a couple occasions on trips where I come to a town and I'm just running dry. I'm feeling burnt out. And what I would do is say, what would Walker Evans photograph in this town? And that would get me started again. So I'd put myself in his mental framework, and I'd seen his work since I was 10, so I knew his work really well. And so I could imagine being in his eyes, what would he photograph?
Have you ever returned to the same space to like a redo or a?
I've returned to the same space by chance, but not to do a redo. Like Beverly and La Brea, my son for a number of years lived like a mile from there. And so I would just have to drive through it. And so
You chose this image, which you said it was the first image you ever made.
well, it's not the first image ever made,
Okay.
but it's the earliest one that I've shown.
Is there a reason why you wanted to do this one and not something else? 'Cause I said put up something for us to look at while we were waiting.
Oh, I like it because it's a picture of a photographer, and it seems like it's a self-aware picture of a photographer. There's my shadow on his coat, and it's one of my favorite pictures. I've always wished I could live up to that.
You didn't put up you've always wished you could live up to it
Yes.
again?
Yeah.
but you haven't come close.
I'm joking.
Okay,
I'm joking.
I was gonna say, that could, we were talking at lunch about when you're sarcastic. I couldn't tell. I couldn't tell you were being sarcastic. One of the things that I also was kind of curious about, which we talked about teaching, and one of the things I'm interested in is that it seems like not only photography is very important to you, but so is writing.
Yes.
And that's not something that you kind of advise other people. Doesn't seem like something you advise people to take up. But
No.
how does writing fit into your practice? And when did you kind of realize that this was something that was also a kind of corollary to what you were doing photographically?
Yeah, I didn't think I was a writer until COVID. I'd written Nature of Photographs, but that grew out of a course I was teaching on photographic seeing. And I just wanted to take the different threads and unpack them and try to be as clear as possible. And it's been a long time working on it. And it didn't come naturally. And then when the COVID lockdown hit, just like a month before, a Japanese magazine called IMA said asked me, they wanted to do an issue on my work and had questions about my influences. And so now I'm in the lockdown, I have nothing to do much. And so I started writing it. And after finishing all of this for the issue, I felt like there was the beginning of a memoir. And so then continued to write. Mm-hmm. And then I started feeling more comfortable writing and liked doing it. And then in the past couple of years, my wife had some medical issues, and so I couldn't travel as much. And so I just found myself writing more and more. Mm-hmm. And now I've written 2 articles the past year for Aperture, and now starting the issue that comes out in September, I'm going to be writing every issue.
Yeah. I'm surprised by that because in a lot of your books, you have lists reproduced. And I thought as somebody who's a maker of lists and of kind of writing notations and writing that you'd always been writing.
No.
But maybe it was there and now it's become a different form.
Yep. Where, I mean, other than nature photographs, I never really tried to sit down and write. And that I went to MacDowell Colony, and it was a struggle because I wanted to be clear about the different factors at play. And so I had to really think about what I meant and how to express it. There isn't a lot of writing in it.
Right.
It's mostly, and still when I write, I always think with pictures. And so everything I've written, pictures are interspersed.
Yeah, I noticed, yes. Yeah, and you have short sections, then you have these pictures.
Yeah.
But when you were writing, did you refer to your class notes, or how did you think about organizing? The
way it started was the text I used for this class in photographic seeing was Sharkowski's book, The Photographer's Eye. Mm-hmm. But I had a problem with it, which is the section on vantage point, because his basic point was these are things that all photographs have in common. But for vantage point, he talks about pictures from the top of the Eiffel Tower, pictures taken through microscopes. And so it wasn't about the fact that every picture has to have a vantage point. He picked special cases. So I thought it was just a slip up on his part. And so I wrote a chapter. So when I taught the class, we used his text for everything else. When it got to vantage point, we used my text. Uh-huh. And then I started adding more to it. And then it became a book. Mm-hmm. And then I got when John read it, he said, he sent me a letter saying, I'm glad I've lived long enough to see it. And he said, if I were to do it, he said, I have a few quibbles here and there, nothing important, but if I were to do something like this again, and I guarantee you I will not,
Mhm.
I would have started with the camera as a perspective machine. That hundreds of years before Talbot learned how to fix the image, the camera was a perspective machine, and wondered if Brunelleschi and Vasari were the real inventors of photography.
Mhm.
I thought I'd throw that in.
Yeah, that's great. You often have these references in your writing and your speaking to historic texts or to kind of philosophers, and I wonder about, you also have this desire to to reinvent yourself and to be current. But I think it's interesting how you use the past still, and you're not looking back in kind of a nostalgic way. You're very much immersed in kind of the contemporary. Is that important to you, that you're not kind of nostalgic?
Yeah, I would say so. But I find, and tell me if you had this experience, you're in the middle of writing and you just randomly pick up a book from your bookshelf and open it, and you find something relevant to what you're writing. Does that happen to you?
Mm-hmm. And you're like, how did this happen? Yes.
What?
Or how this is the key, right? This
Yes,
is it.
yes.
Yes.
And that's the thing I love about the writing. This didn't happen much. It happened one instance when I was doing nature photographs, and now it happens regularly. And that's what's fascinating. So I'll find these old sources. I'm going through P.H. Emerson's Naturalistic Photography, and I open it, and there's this sentence about seeing a picture on the ground glass of the mind. Well, this is exactly what I'm writing about.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's almost, you've been absorbing all of what you've been seeing.
Yeah.
That reminds me of a story that you were telling me. I guess it was.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mickey, but don't you find that an exciting part of writing when that happens?
I
Like
do.
if you feel like you're on the right track?
Well, yeah, you feel like I'm finally kind of saying something that I've been believing in, but I'm finally articulating it. Right.
Yeah.
You said you were talking about leaving the room and coming back and your students kind of having a discovery. And I feel like that's kind of the moment you're describing as well, that you've been gone, all of a sudden you come back and they've unlocked something.
Yeah.
Like it's about that, a similar kind of accessing of influence or putting something together. To me, it reminds me of that same kind of moment of discovery.
Yes.
So this is a slideshow of, you said that you put together for another project.
This was a show that it's based on a slideshow I gave in Beijing 2 years ago. And then I just added pictures like this of early work, this book that's here, and some pictures related to my new work. So it wasn't meant to be a slideshow for us. It's just if there's any work you want to refer to, it's samples of everything, and I can always call it up.
Yeah, no, I think. Well, I mean, you've got over 300 works here. Maybe you want to choose something for us to look at.
Is there something you want to talk about? Any particular body of work?
I don't want to go too far back. I mean, I like American Services a lot, but I don't want you to feel like you're stuck in the past here.
Okay. Let me see if I have that picture of rocks.
That's the picture that I've been asking you to talk about.
Yeah,
But
and I don't know if I have it. Well, here you can see what I have.
oh no, now you have to go
I
back.
go back. I'll get rid of this. There we go. Okay.
But we can, I mean, you can also pull up one. I mean, I think
I
my,
don't have the rock one.
okay. I think my question has to do with whether or not in this kind of process, and you just did these lectures in Paris.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if in this process of now speaking and writing, how your attention to your own work has shifted.
That's an interesting question. Writing a memoir, and I think it's also just a factor of age that I'm looking back retrospectively on my own work. And so seeing it from a perspective that I couldn't have in the midst of it. Mm-hmm. And so, I just find it interesting. And I found that I, in certain ways, have recontextualized it. And also realized, I think what's partially behind the writing is there are certain things that I want to say about photography, and that's what the writing is about. That's not just what I could put in a picture, or at least provide a door into a picture.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's so much in the images that I was wondering if you're so direct in how you tell people to look. Like in those lectures, you're very much like, look this way and look that way. Mm-hmm. How does your own shift? How does your own perspective shift on an image, so to speak? Like how you start. Well, because you're very clear in those lectures about how you inspire people to start.
Let me find a picture and then we can. Okay. So I would say, look at this picture and move your attention from the foreground, the bottom edge, along the ground, without skipping over anything, all the way to the horizon. And when you do it, do it again and take your time. And does anyone have a sensation of their eye changing focus? Yes, no? So what I understand is happening is that your eye is not literally changing focus. You're looking at a flat screen, but when you look at anything, the experience of looking is you're seeing a mental image, a mental construction. I guess in a crude way, people think that there are these little homunculi in their heads looking out through windows. And Descartes thought we were looking at, he understood that light was coming in the eye. The retina was seeing it upside down and backwards. He thought it all went to the pineal gland, but that somewhere in there was a theater, and you were, again, this homunculus sitting looking at the theater. And this, again, is not what's happening. It's going to different parts of the brain. Different aspects of what you're seeing are being processed in different areas, and somehow, and I don't think anyone understands how, a mental image is created. And this is how we see all the time. Certain pictures tell us how to create a mental image of themselves. This picture tells you to create a three-dimensional mental image. And so the experience of refocusing is the experience of the depth of your mental image, not of what you're seeing on the screen. And that quality of focusing through the space of a picture, for me, is the key to a picture. When I look at student work, that's what I do with each picture. I look at the picture, I focus through the space. And if you do that, sometimes you begin to get a taste of what's on the photographer's mind, either consciously or unconsciously. Like if a student's work is clear and you can see what they're paying attention to, you can see confused areas. And the key to it is making contact with the picture in this way. We tend to look in a kind of lazy way. Our eyes have depth of field like a camera does. Anyone who wears glasses and knows that if you have a piece of paper and you forgot your glasses, if you hold it by the sunlight, it's sharper. That's because your iris closes down, you have greater depth of field. And so we tend to look in a kind of lazy way. We look out and I see everyone out there, but that's not the same as my actually taking the time to focus my attention through all the space, all the way to the photographs hanging on the back wall. And if you do that, if you just become aware of how far I am away from you right now, your perception is changing. And now you're engaging with your visual process in a different way, in a much more conscious, metacognitive way.
Yeah. You talk a lot about this is, in your lectures recently you talked about this, and one of the things that I was thinking about was, in some ways you're talking to photographers, but you've also kind of expanded it through your writing to other.
Yes.
You're thinking about just viewership.
Yeah, I
right?
think it may not occur to anyone, an average person looking at a photograph, to do what I just suggested. It may not even occur to a photographer to.
Mm-hmm.
But anyone can engage. Focus is the center of a nexus that connects the world and the mind and attention. And it all comes together through the act of focus. And some people may come across it naturally. Other people, this is why people are teachers. They teach you things you didn't know before. And so I could say everyone in the room now knows this. If you may have known it before, now if you didn't, you know it now. That you can pay attention in this way and move your attention through space, and things look different. You become more actually engaged.
Yeah, I mean, in that way, you're not just teaching people and broader than photo students or photographers, but you're also talking about accessing like a sensation.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? A kind of sensorial experience.
And I
of the
think
world.
people might find that their narrative self quiets down when they're doing it.
Say
Like
more about that.
The words in your head, that's sort of the constant narration we hear. So I teach a view camera class every semester, 4x5, and about 2/3 of the way through the class, I ask the students, who are all at this point 19, it's a second year class rather, does anyone find that they're in a flow state when they're working with the camera? And every hand goes up. And this is very interesting. Like, here is the slowest, largest, most time-consuming and laborious camera, and their narrative self-quiets and they go into a flow state using it. I think that's very interesting.
Mm-hmm. And more uncommon,
Yes.
right, to access that.
Well, that's one of the reasons I wrote this book, is that I saw with the rise of digital, which I use all the time. I have nothing against digital. There's some cameras, it expands what can be done. There are pictures that can only be taken with a digital camera. It means there are certain things a photographer can express that couldn't be expressed with another camera. So that's great. But it also means people don't have as much of the embodied experience of photography.
And you still, this is the new book, The Mental Image,
Yes.
that you're talking about, and it's coming out in October.
Yes.
But you still speak about this, and you're not, there's another band of photography that's always talking about the end of photography. Photography is over. Photography is what's happening. And that's never really been your...
Well, I've heard that for about 60 years.
Now you've heard it about
I
times.
mean, I've literally heard people, Mitch can attest to this. Marvin can attest to this. In the early 70s, people were saying nothing new can be photographed. Yes? That's because if they thought of something new, they would do it. But then someone else comes along. Then, Jeff Wall, Cindy Sherman comes along. Mikhail Schmidt comes along.
Well, is there something to, I mean, the kind of sensation, like you're asking, viewers, photographers to be kind of sensitive to,
Yep.
surface, to light. And that is a little bit more difficult now. I mean, there's so many different things to see. It's harder to see these kind of gradations. I mean, wouldn't you agree?
I think
Without, you have to train your eye to do it, but even.
I think there are a lot of cultural forces that are eroding the ability to pay attention.
Yeah, I know you wrote, one of the things that in a book from a long time ago, you wrote that attention is of the essence of our powers. And
I didn't write that.
You didn't?
Louis Sullivan wrote
Okay,
it.
because it was in your book, sorry.
I
thought
quoted
it was
him,
great.
but
I was like, wait a minute.
yes, it's great, but I don't want to take credit for it.
But it's in in the back of the book, it's photographer's picks. Well, why didn't you credit it then? It's not credited.
Yes,
but
it is.
Okay. It is, okay.
Oh yeah, it's credited.
Well, but you've said a
It's
version.
from his book, Kindergarten Chats.
But you've said a version of this.
I've said it many times.
But it's still it's challenging. So there's a part of you that does believe that not the photography is over, or that the photography is ending, but that the kind of advocacy that you're doing around thinking and seeing, that it does require a certain degree of work right now.
I think it always required intentionality. That it didn't happen at any time just by accident. I think a lot of view camera photographers engaged with it because the view camera almost forces you to, because you have to conceptualize the image before you take it. You don't walk around with an 8x10 looking for a picture.
Right.
So that means the camera's in my car, I'm walking down the street, I see a picture. I take a quarter out of my pocket, I move around like that, say, here's the exact spot, right? So you do that? And I put a quarter down, or a pebble or something, and then I go get the camera and set it up. But I've already framed the picture. I know where the frame is going to go. There may be other factors that I didn't take into account. A car pulls in, a cloud goes over, something changes. But basically, the picture is in my mind, or what P.H. Emerson called the ground glass of my mind, before I set up the camera. And so view camera photographers from the beginning have always thought that way. They've always conceptualized the image because you have to with the view camera. From 1835 on. And then with an 8x10, or if you're a 19th century photographer with a mammoth plate, if you're using the rising front, which for view camera photographers, I use it every time. It's just it's as much a standard action as deciding where the frame is going to go, moving the camera left and right, cranking up the tripod. So I use the rising front every time. You can't reach the front of the lens to use the rising front and be back far enough to see the whole frame of the picture. And so if I'm looking at, say, where the edge of the picture is in relation to the top of buildings, and I could look and make that space look right, I can make that space look right and forget how that adjustment affects everything else in the picture. So that doesn't work. So I have to conceptualize the picture a second time. and have a mental image of the picture as I'm making that adjustment. And it sometimes means making an adjustment that looks wrong in isolation, but right in terms of the whole. And then I think people conceptualize it a third time when you're standing next to the camera. I'm standing and taking a picture. I'm imagining where the frame is, and I'm waiting for the right moment. And so I have, again, the picture in my mind. So this is why I think a lot of the view camera photographers of the 20th century talked about pre-visualization. And I think eventually the word has been misconceived. It makes it sound like I'm sitting at home and conceiving a picture.
Right.
And even, I think, Ansel understood that finally. In the last edition of his books, The Camera, the Negative, and the Print, he doesn't call it pre-visualization, he calls it visualization, which is what it is. It's being metacognitively aware of what you're seeing as you're seeing it. It's what I asked you to do before. It's being aware of your mental image. But in terms of photographic materials, that if you're shooting black and white, it's being aware of it. You know, if someone shoots black and white for years, they literally see in black and white. It's being aware of the focal length of the lens or what the depth of field is. But it's not, the pre is throwing people off. It's an awareness as you're doing it, and that awareness morphs as you have new perceptions.
You describe the new book as controversial. Is that why? Because you think people have misunderstood this idea of pre-visualization?
No, it's controversial because of something else. Should I go into it?
Sure.
Okay. It relates to pre-visualization. So take a look at these pictures, and when you look at them, do you notice any difference in tonality and depth of tone between them? So the picture on the left, this is done with a Nikon on a tripod. I gave the camera to a first-year photo student who knows how to use a camera, and took her into Tivoli and said, photograph whatever you want. And she took that picture. And she walked away, and I walked over to the camera and took the second picture. And this is what's controversial, that the photographer, who the photographer is, affects the picture directly.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Not if to say if I walked to the street and took a picture, it would be different. That's obvious. But I'm saying she takes a picture, walks away from the camera, and I take a picture without changing the focus, the exposure. I can show you histograms and metadata that show that the exposure is exactly the same, the image is processed the same, but if you look at the histogram and there are little arrows put to where it's different, the histogram is different. It's those two arrows in the pictures in the histogram show a difference in the histogram. This is something that was talked about among photographers since at least Stieglitz. This is what, when people were talking about, when Weston started talking about pre-visioning, which is the word he used, this is what, I think they were afraid to say this because it's inexplicable. I don't pretend I can explain it. I know I came across it on my own, and then I was being represented by Peter McGill at the time, and I showed it to Peter, and he saw the difference and said, "You better talk to Fred Summer." So we knew each other. We weren't friends, but I could call him up and say, "Hi, this is Stephen." And he said, yes, this has been known to photographers for 100 years. He said, Minor White thinks it's mystical, but it's physics. People have not wanted to talk about it because it's controversial. I was concerned that not many people alive were aware of this, and that when those of us who did died, this tradition that started at least at the beginning of the 20th century would disappear. This knowledge would disappear. So I called up Paul Caponigro, who I knew was schooled in it and understood this. And he was like 92 at the time, and he said, I think you should write it. And then he died about 6 weeks later. His son knew I was doing this, and he told his mother, Paul's ex-wife, Eleanor, and she sent the following story. The composer Ernest Bloch was a guest at Cal Berkeley in the music department, and it was a dinner for him was held at the home of the head of the music school there. And Bloch told the following story. In 1917, he was at dinner at Stieglitz's house and was holding forth and saying, photography is not an art. And Stieglitz said, come to my studio on Sunday and we'll go out and take pictures. And they went out, and Stieglitz set up the camera, and Bloch took a picture, and then Stieglitz took the exact same picture with the same exposure. They developed the pictures side by side, and Bloch said, I immediately saw the difference in the pictures. So I got that letter from Eleanor 2 weeks after I did this with the student, where Stieglitz did the exact same thing with Ernest Bloch. I don't know this. I know that Stieglitz was the source for all this. I suspect he got it from Emerson, but I don't know. Let me see if I can find it. There's a quote from Emerson in Naturalistic Photography. Remember that aside from him talking about the ground glass of the mind, he said, remember that your photograph is as true an index of your mind as if you had written out a confession of faith on paper. And I know that Emerson was a mentor to Stieglitz, so I suspect that Emerson was the source, but I don't know that.
Remember that was it his confession of, I didn't hear the word faith?
Faith.
Faith. Wow.
That your photograph is as true a picture of your mind as if you had written out a confession of faith on paper.
So the new book explores this.
So the new book is talking about the mechanism of sight, about the mental image. It's about embodied cognition, embodied perception, and it's about this aspect of photography and about a way of approaching it. You see, I think that when Weston talked about pre-visioning, he was thinking that if you become metacognitively aware of what you're photographing, you're influencing the photograph in just this way, just by that metacognitive awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And he could say that without getting into this kind of hocus pocus that I'm getting into. The problem is that if you don't know that you're controlling it in that way, it cuts off options on the photographer's part. Like if you know that this is what's happening, I can be more, for example, I talked about being aware of space. I could say, I want to emphasize the space between us, and I can be aware of that. As soon as I'm aware of it, my perception changes. And in the book, I go through other things too, like, let me see if I can get an example. I'm sorry, it's taking long. They're in chronological order, and I want to get something fairly recent. No, I don't have it. Okay. This will be good. Okay. So in the book, I would say things like, look at this picture and be aware of your spine. And does your perception change? If you're aware of the center of your chest, does your perception change? If I just said, be aware of seeing, pre-visualize, that doesn't give the photographer the agency to control what they're seeing. And by being explicit, which I am, and giving tools like be aware of your spine, that expands. The photographer then knows that they're controlling it and has begins to have a vocabulary. And where I learned the vocabulary was, for almost a decade, I studied with a performance coach in New York named Amos Gunsberg. And he was trained in the bel canto operatic tradition. His teacher was a very old woman who she and her husband began teaching in the late 1910s in Rome. He was the teacher of a great tenor named Beniamino Gigli. And this is what was at the heart of bel canto teaching, that by moving your attention and your body in different ways, you're affecting harmonics of the voice. And so if you, just by coincidence, I found a paper written by a professor at University College London in the early 70s, where he analyzes with sound devices, sound evaluation devices, the harmonics of Gigli's singing. And that he's, aside from the notes he's singing, he's controlling the harmonics throughout the whole piece in a very particular way. And he's doing it by this method. And what Gunsberg realized was this method is applicable to not just singers. He worked with singers, actors, musicians, artists. And so it gives a vocabulary for how to have agency over your mental image.
I just feel like so much of your thinking, it's so important to hear you speak. I mean, it's very different to read. I mean, you can feel a sense of your tone in your writing, but so much of understanding really comes with how you bring it together in person. Is that something that, and more you've been doing this, like you did this, this long lecture series in Paris, and then wondering if you're thinking more and more about, I don't want to call it performance, but the kind of descriptive way in which you introduce people to these kinds of concepts as an experience.
I hadn't thought about it. I mean,
I guess because you teach and it all is kind of what you do in your teaching, but
I'm teaching
for those of us
anyway.
who aren't in your class,
Right.
it is kind of, it's a,
Yes. Well, I'm taking advantage of situations like this, but I don't think I'm ready to like hit the road and start.
well, you,
But Makeda and I were talking earlier, and I was saying that I understand that these ideas are very controversial. And when I showed in Paris, I gave a series of, there were these lectures endowed by Chanel where I did 4 lectures over 5 days with the same audience. You had to buy a ticket to all of them. And the last lecture was about this. And someone asked me to explain it. And I said, I can't. I said, is there anyone in the room who didn't see a difference between the pictures?
Right.
And no one raised their hand. And no one asked anything else.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like it when artists pretend to be scientists and say something they don't really know. I remember thinking when Summer said it's physics that I assumed he was referring to quantum mechanics. But I don't know. I mean, I think what he was saying was ultimately, the way I took it was, we may not know the mechanism now, but when we do, it's not going to be magical, it's going to be physical. And I think about, there's a circulatory system in the body that was discovered in the past 5 years, the interstitial system. We knew about the cardiovascular system and the lymphatic system. People have been doing dissections for millennia, and only in the past 5 years we discovered there was a new, I wouldn't say a new, it was a new discovery of a circulatory system, which may explain Chinese medicine, which people would think in Western science they knew that some things for pain relief made sense, but that basically it was nonsense. Well,
Yeah.
Before Maxwell, people didn't know about electromagnetic phenomena.
But in a lot of ways, a lot of what you speak about, and even your newer work, it's interesting how much it has depended on your career's worth of working with cameras and working and doing this work and embodying this work.
Yes.
Which brings me
Yes.
back to the same question of like, how do you're teaching people to access that, but it's a learned experience.
Yes. And a former student of mine sent me a book he's written about aesthetics just in the past couple of weeks. And he makes theoretical assertions, like there are many different theories on what's called the hard problem in consciousness. And he states one as though it were settled science.
Mm-hmm.
And none of them are settled science.
Mm-hmm.
And then based on that makes deductions. And the deductions are all logical, but they're all based on something that's not settled science.
Right.
So there's a lot that I read that's logical, but if the premises that the logic is based on are unfalsifiable or untrue, it doesn't work. It's not. But there also are theories that come out of just repeated practice.
Right.
If you do something for 70 years,
Right.
you begin to see patterns,
Right.
and it's not logically provable, but
Something's.
it's real.
But it's interesting also that you set out on these journeys and on these paths with these kind of parameters almost as if to pursue this idea that there are theories of things, but in order to know them, it takes a kind of aggregate, and it takes a return and a
Yes.
movement in order to actually arrive at them.
Yes. Yes.
I think I have one more question to ask,
Okay.
and maybe other people have questions. You told Lynn Tillman that you were a poor editor of your work.
Yes.
Is that what you said? And I'm wondering if you're drawn to the kind of the collection, like why the grouping, why there's always a lot, like you need to have huge numbers of photographs and kind of collections. Why is that?
Well,
What draws you to that kind of the grouping?
you mean like the books? Or what?
The series, like there's always a lot. There's always you're always using a lot of images and a lot of collections of images.
Well, they're often done over years. So
But there's not something about having.
I did a book that has 24 pictures in it. You may not have seen. It's called
So
Elements.
You are a good editor. In
Well,
some
it doesn't mean
cases. I'm just interested in
when I said I was a
accumulation.
bad editor,
What did you mean by that?
when I was doing editing Uncommon Places with Carol Kazmarek, it started in the late 70s, and I was in the midst of work. I was still doing that project, and so the questions that were on my mind in 77 were not the questions that were on my mind in 74 or 73. They were settled for me in a way, and I was less interested in them.
I see.
Now I look back and I can see it. It's all in the distance. And so things that were on my mind in 73 are just as interesting. But in the moment, I was interested in what I was interested in right then. And so discounted some of the earlier pictures. And have relied on, like, I know a lot of photographers are very careful about the sequencing of their books and are seeing the book as the work. And I tend to rely on professional editors to sequence it. I tend to, I may have a lot, but I try not to have any picture that isn't top rate. And I'll take things out. Like when I did the drone pictures with Michael Mack, he had more in. And I took like 20 of them out. And he said, "You're the only photographer who wants less." But I will rely on Michael because he does this. This is what he does for a living. He sequences pictures and is very talented at it. And I don't care as much about this as it's not what I do well.
Is the new book, you've talked about reinventing yourself. Is this the newest part of your reinvention, of your ongoing work to reinvent yourself?
The
The
middle
newest
image.
book? Yes.
I wouldn't say this is something that's been on my mind for literally 40 years. And
But putting it to paper,
putting it to paper, as I mentioned to you before we talked, that I think the time has changed and people are open to the possibility. I mean, I don't want to speak for all of you. I mean, probably some of you may think this is crazy, but some of you might think, well, I don't know. And I think the time has changed and people are maybe more open to it. And I'm now this distinguished photographer, and I found that people won't tell me to my face that I'm crazy. They'll ghost me before they do that. So I have a little protective cushion that I'm not going to get any. Maybe online I'd get blowback, but not to my face.
Well, maybe we'll see if anybody has any questions. Should we ask for questions?
Sounds like they're going to put up to
Thank you so much. This was fascinating. I just wonder whether the student who took the first photograph, did she have a take on what was different? I mean, how did she understand what had happened between those two photos?
She afterwards saw the difference. She didn't know, I don't think she fully understood what I was attempting when we did it. But afterward, I showed her mine and she saw the difference.
But she didn't have a theory.
No,
Yeah.
she didn't have a theory.
Okay. Thank you. Fascinating.
I don't have a theory. But what I'm reminded of is I have a friend who years ago bought a pair of Red Wing boots, and the laces were different lengths. And he was driving around the country years later, and they were in the trunk of his car with some other clothes. And he was in Wisconsin and realized, I'm just 10 miles from the Red Wing head office. I'm going to go there and complain about my boots. And he goes there and he puts the boots down in front of them and says, I got these boots and the laces are different lengths. And they said, we're sorry, sir, that's not possible. And he said, here they are. You can see the laces are different lengths. And they said, well, I'm sorry, this is not possible. So they can't explain why they're different lengths. Their position was it's not possible. His position was I don't know why they're different lengths, but here's the reality. And I'm saying if you saw a difference between these two pictures taken less than a minute apart, with no change in lighting, exposure, anything, then something's in my book. I have 3 different examples of it. Something's going on. What? It's there. Yeah.
Hi, Stephen. So I have a question kind of in regards to the physics that you talked about with the difference between those two pictures. But I've been telling this story, and I don't remember exactly where I got it, but the space between the lens and the receiver on, say, an iPhone that's like infinitely small versus the space between the lens in a film plane on an 8x10 camera, which is much larger in the space of like projecting a silver gelatin mural print in a room. I just wonder if you have thoughts on what happens physically to light particles or imagery in that space.
I have no theory.
What?
I have no theory about it.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know why the distance would make, I mean, I don't know about a phone which is so close, but this was on a Nikon, and I can't say that the distance makes any difference. I don't know. I'm not a physicist, so I don't want to speculate. All I'm going to say is the laces are different lengths.
Stephen, I was just looking up how much the Earth moves in a second.
Yes.
So the Earth spins at 1,500 feet a second.
Yes.
So if someone was standing next to you and the camera was on a tripod and it took a second or two for them to approach the lens, is it not possible that the light coming from the sun might have changed enough to make the picture look different?
If it did, the automatic exposure of the camera would have changed, and that would show up on the metadata. If the light got brighter, the lens would close down automatically because there's a built-in exposure meter in the camera. And that change, first of all, you wouldn't see a change at all. The camera would erase the change, but any change would show up in the metadata. It shows the f-stop.
Okay. Just thinking. Yeah.
Hi, thank you very much for this fruitful conversation. I'm a psychiatrist and a photographer, so I'm intrigued by the concept of a mental image as well. And about this image behind you, my question is why did you ask us to focus on our spine? And I can tell you what happened to me when I
Please.
focused on my spine.
Yes.
I felt like I was losing my balance and I was possibly falling into this valley, because you're looking down. And there was a physicality to this that I actually felt like I was losing my balance and it didn't seem flat. So that's what I experienced. But I wanted to know your intention, why you asked the question, or why you ask people to focus on their spine when they're looking at this.
I picked this picture because it's one that I think is open to being seen in different ways. And that, when I'm taking a picture like this, I'm standing next to the camera and I'm trying to think of the word. I wouldn't say meditative state because it's more active than that. But I try to become as conscious of everything I can be conscious of as much as possible, which is partially physical. It could also be emotional, and I want to be clear about this, that there are some emotions, some emotional states that enhance what you see. This is not the same. There are other emotions where you go off on associative chains of thought, which takes you away from the world. And if you did that, I'm going to just pick something that's not true to myself, but if I was taking a picture of Brian and I look at his jacket and it reminds me of an uncle of mine who yelled at me at Thanksgiving, my picture would be flatter and less vivid because I'm leaving contact with the world and going off into past memory or past experience. But any emotion or psychological state that enhances or makes more present the experience, I believe can be communicated in the picture. When Stieglitz was doing the equivalence, he picked clouds because he wanted subject matter that was available to anyone, where you didn't have to have special permission. You didn't have to know Marsden Hartley to do his portrait. You didn't have to be able to travel to some exotic. You didn't have to be able to travel to Bangalore with Samuel Bourne and take a picture. Clouds are available to anyone. And said he can put his entire philosophy of life into a picture. Now, what I would say, but I think there's something to notice, which is that he started with subject matter that was kind of culturally neutral, clouds. And then it developed into pictures of, say, trees. But by the end of his life, he was photographing the New York landscape, which was not culturally neutral. So I think he, over the last 20 years of his life, understood that for him to do what he was doing didn't have to be subject matter that didn't have cultural resonance. And then you can extend this on into the future and look at some Egglestons and see that feeling his mind at work, his deep experience at work, understanding cultural resonance of the world he was in.
That point is well taken, but just circling back to what I was curious about is why did you ask people to focus on their spine and not on their shoulders, for example? What was the intent about the spine?
The spine is different in terms of. No, I mean this in
what comes to mind for me is like my spine could start tingling.
Yes.
Or if I
mean,
focus on
you-
my knees would start to tremble. So
but people
looking down,
sometimes
but I-
focus on their spine and have a sense of energy flowing up their spine.
yes.
And if I
Yes.
said your elbow, you wouldn't have the same.
It's very true. Yes. 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 Thank you. Thank you.
I would say this. So if you can imagine a dancer who has to maintain a kind of physical presence, and what if the dancer is simply standing still on a stage? They still have that physical presence. And what if you experience that when you're taking a picture? How does that affect your picture?
It's a very interesting question. I look forward to reading your book.
Okay.
Thank you.
Very briefly, why did you take that second picture?
I took it to show this phenomenon. I mean, I came across it on my own in '87. The work I had been doing for the previous couple of years, I started showing qualities of my perception that felt like it went beyond simple photographic decisions of framing, light, vantage point. And so in Texas, where I took this picture and the other one I showed you, I ran a test where one picture I had a flat mental image, and the second picture I turned the film holder over, took another picture where before I took it I had a very deep mental image. And this is what I showed to people when I got back to New York, when I showed to Peter McGill, and everyone who saw it saw the difference. I don't want to show it because there are too many variables. These are separate sheets of film, processed separately. There's no way to say that if Marvin is thinking the Earth is turning a little bit, to take two sheets of film processed separately, there could be difference in the developing bath. They're printed separately on separate pieces of paper. Those pieces of paper are processed separately. There are too many variables. So it was enough to convince me, but I don't want to use it as an example. So I wanted to pick something where I can control as many of the variables as possible. In fact, in printing the book, we changed the pagination of the book so all of these comparisons will fall on the same form. So it wouldn't be in two different forms. So they're all printed on the same sheet of paper. We're trying to control the variables, to try to be as clear as possible.
I understand, but you didn't change anything, right?
Correct,
So why did you take the second picture?
to show the difference,
What difference?
the difference the photographer makes. Well, but listen, I understand. I mean, I'm glad you shook your head because I would have expected more people to shake their head. I understand what I'm saying doesn't completely make sense, but I can tell you it's something that for about 100 years, a group of photographers believed and practiced.
Yeah, thank you so much. This has been so interesting. I guess just 2 points. One is I don't use a view camera, but I photograph at nighttime. And so I feel like I get into that's sort of my view camera where I don't look through the lens. I don't look through the viewfinder, but sort of intuitively feel what's there. And that's, I think, partially what we're talking about a little bit. But the other thing was, and it helps me to get into these other states of being, I think, that you're talking about and referencing. But the other thing of this discussion, I think it almost sort of encapsulates photography in a way Because on the one hand, it's a document, making a photograph is a document of something. And so we have the documentation of this different phenomenon or the different images that we see in your example. But on the other hand, it's deeply personal and it's made by a human. And so that's where that's where it's imbued with this other mysterious element that I have no idea. I mean, I haven't really thought about it, but I think it's really interesting. And I think that's really also the essence of photography as well. And that's the combining of these two, where it's sort of a document, and then it's also a personal history that's brought, that's imbued in every image.
I would say that even what you're calling a document is personal, because every decision that a photographer makes, exactly what the vantage point is, exactly what the light angle of the light is, exactly where the frame falls, all of this affects the picture. Matisse wrote about, see if I can paraphrase it, that the emotion in his paintings was not the result of an expression on someone's face or, as he put it, a violent gesture, but the placement of everything on the canvas, the placement and the color. So it's all the formal elements of a picture are creating the taste of the picture, not simply a reading of the content. Do you think this, what I talked about the snake, makes sense in this conversation? Yes.
The new photo you're going to make,
Yeah.
yes.
So I was telling Makeda at lunch, yesterday I bought on Amazon a rather large rubber boa constrictor, bright yellow. And I was going to, it's for something I'm writing, a thing I'm writing for Aperture. And I was going to put it in front of my front door sill. And so you would see a little bit of my front porch, the boa constrictor, the front door sill, and the door slightly ajar opening in. And then I was going to take a second picture and replace the yellow boa constrictor with a banana peel. And then take a third picture where I put the snake on grass. And my question is, which two are most similar? So which two do you think are most similar?
I kind of disassociated, so I don't really remember what the question was. The snake, the banana.
Snake, what do you think, Brian? Right. The Instagram algorithm would pick the two snake pictures because it's looking for the nouns, not the predicates. See, as photographers, the first two pictures have the exact same framing. They both have something yellow in the center. They both also have an element of hazard, a snake in front of the door, a banana peel, although I don't think there's anyone in the room who's actually ever slipped on the banana peel. It's just a cultural thing we have. But they both have that element of hazard. But the algorithm looks at the noun, snake, snake. It doesn't look at the predicate. And it's the predicate that makes a picture why it's not simply a document. So I don't think you have to go this far to take a picture that's personal. I think if you're conscious of just the basic photographic decisions, it's going to be personal.
Hi, Stephen. Thank you. You mentioned that you, after writing the mental image, you've returned to using the 8x10 view
Yes.
camera, that you longed, you didn't use the word longed, but that
Yes,
you missed.
longed.
You longed, okay.
Yes.
For the embodied experience that
Yes.
it
Yeah.
enables. Are you ready yet to discuss how the writing has informed the return to the pictures and how, if they're different, how the writing has informed the return to the 8x10 and to black and white as well?
Well, my decision to do that is a result of the writing, because I was writing about this experience of embodied cognition and embodied photography, and a lot of it has to, and I was sort of giving advice, like where to begin. And one thing is to use a tripod. Even if it's a little Canon point and shoot, put it on a tripod and see what happens. That the tripod is a major part of it. And in just thinking about it, it made me wish to go back to do it. The reason it's black and white is what I'm photographing is my garden, and I didn't want it in color. I'm saying this though it's logical, that of course you don't want a garden picture in color, but I guess it's not logical, because you're sort of looking at me like, what's he saying? He's photographing his garden in black and white, but that's my answer.
Thank you.
Yes.
It's a, I feel like, pretty simple question. I feel like in one of your answers, you revealed something to me that I felt like you weren't revealing when talking about the two pictures that were next to each other, which is the difference is the photographer.
Yes.
And so you weren't really revealing that.
No, I said
So you believe it's the photographer?
Absolutely, I believe it's the photographer.
I mean, one clearly looked like a more beautiful tone, and it happened to be yours. I'm just wondering if there was any.
Well, she was a first-year student, and I've been doing it for 70 years.
Okay, but there was no difference, except for the photographer.
Correct.
But you're saying there is a difference because you had been doing it for 70 years.
There's a difference. What I'm saying is, if one photographer has had experience, and
okay, this is what I wanted to get
consciously.
at. Actually. Okay.
And one thing I make clear in the book is that the book is sort of following on the book Nature of Photographs. And the Nature of Photographs talks about 3 levels of a photograph. Physical, which is this piece of paper or image on a screen, or an image on an iPhone. It's something physical. In that physical object is an illusion of an image. The Texas desert. It could have an illusion of space in it. The 3rd level is the mental level, which is how we receive it. And that's when we talked about focusing through the space of the picture. And did you have a sensation of your eye changing focus? This is that's the mental level, which is how we actually see and receive the picture. Or how we receive and receive anything. That's how we see. Mm-hmm. To deal with the mental level, a person has to have mastered the first 2. And for me, the technical side of photography, I spent, let's say, the decade of the 60s. The formal side of photography, how decisions about framing, vantage point, focus, moment of exposure, how they affect the picture. I spent the decade of the 70s learning. So to have the control that I'm talking about is not something that I'm suggesting that anyone picking up a camera would have. I'm writing a book for people. I'm writing it for people who want to look at pictures and understand looking at pictures in a different way. But it's also there are a lot of people who have been doing photography for years and for whom this might help them understand where they are and what they can do and what they may have been doing unconsciously.
Mhm.
I mean, I look at work and I see, brilliance in it. I don't mean like intellectual brilliance. I mean almost physical brilliance, and aliveness. And I don't know if the person is conscious of what I'm talking about or not. Probably not. But it's happening in their work. So I'm not saying that a second first-year student taking the second picture would have had any difference. But I'm saying that someone who has spent at least 20 years working with photography, consciously exploring it, not just going out taking pictures, but really, this is what the focus of their life is, that they may reach a point where they have control over this other level as well.
I mean, I don't mean to contradict you or anything, but I mean, couldn't it also just be a person in the world that has lived a visual life? Or,
Yes.
I mean, it could be a painter, it could be a writer who's paying attention. I mean, I'm just, to make it exclusively photographers, I almost hope it's not. I hope it's also.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot that goes into it. Like if you have experience as a photographer, you internalize the frame. I put a lens on and I know I know what to expect with this lens at f/16 in terms of depth of field.
Mhm.
There's so many variables in the picture that are just the product of experience.
Mhm.
That I think a painter can see vividly and see the world vividly. And I'm not questioning it. I'm not saying no. I don't know if they picked up a camera, to what extent they would get it. But I can also tell you that I have students who I can see in their work that they really see vividly and that they're putting it in their work.
Mhm.
I'm thinking of, I taught a color class 2 years ago, and there's a student who wasn't a photo major, and every picture he took had this kind of sense of presence.
Mhm.
So it was coming into his work, and he had not mastered it. So maybe you're right.
Thank you.
Thank you.